Well, welcome to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trey Holiday, and today I don't get to throw it over to my guy, Big O. I am feeling some type of way about that, but I'll get over it. I really will. The crew and O have lined up an amazing show for you guys today, and so I'm hoping I can bring the joy to you guys on this beautiful Thursday morning. As always, you guys know the heat advisory is still in effect. Please stay hydrated this week. It's going to be some high temperatures out there. So today we have a great show. Like I said, we're going to start actually with a lineup that I want to give you guys. Again, as we've said here many times, the footage does not lie. And so I first want to start off with a clip from King 5. Shout out to King 5. Thank you for this clip of Chief Best and the Mayor Jenny Durkin, doing a press conference, and they are basically trying to indicate that the police only use brute force towards any protesters who were agitators or destroyers of property. And so we want to play this clip for you. It's about 45 seconds that just explains, that kind of gives them explaining why the police used force on Saturday. So let's go ahead and roll that clip.
In new court documents, the group Black Lives Matter accuses SPD of violating a judge's order, limiting the use of munitions like tear gas, blast balls, and pepper spray. Quote, simply put, it is always wrong to attack protesters peacefully exercising their constitutional rights with potentially lethal force. It is always unconstitutional to fire indiscriminately into a crowd, but that's exactly what SPD did, Black Lives Matter wrote in its filing. SPD pushed back, saying pepper spray was used only in direct, targeted response to acts of violence.
We will continue to hold our police accountable. We want them to only follow the rules and regulations. The Office of Police Accountability is looking at complaints today. This chief will hold them accountable.
Well, there you have it, guys. It sounds like what's coming out of Mayor Durkin's office and what's coming from the chief of police and the police office is that, hey, the only time they really used any brute force was when they were threatened with violence. And again, we know, and we've heard the stories before about how the police have to use certain forces just to protect themselves. So with that being said, I want to be sure that anyone who is watching, please note that the next clip we're going to show may cause some triggers out there. So again, if you are triggered by any of the violence that you've seen in the protests, any of the interactions with police and protesters, please know that this clip right here is going to show that. So if you need a second, turn away, turn off the volume, whatever you have to do to make sure that you're okay. We're gonna go ahead and roll of actual footage of the day from Saturday. Go ahead, Alia, roll that clip.
Yes. Flashbang now. All right, hold on. Not right there. Oh shit, dog! You just. What are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, he just threw it right at me. Bro, man, he just threw it right at me. There go another one. He just threw it right at me. Bro, I'm not your enemy. I'm not your enemy. Get up, corner. No, corner. Right here, let's stay tight. All the media stay tight. Come in a little tighter. They're getting ready to move. Get tight. They're getting ready to. All the media over here. All the media get tight. All the way right there. That's where they started at. God damn it!
Well, so you guys know right here on this platform, we talk about people being accountable all the time. We talk about the fact that right here, the live stream just shows what's occurring literally as it's occurring. There's no edits there. There's really only the commentators of the live streamers. And let me just say, I got to make this disclaimer. If Omari was here, he would definitely say it. Forgive him, Reverend Walden, for that bad language. But right there, you guys are able to kind of see yourselves. You know, one of the things that we love about live streaming and about this protest movement, what's being captured by people who are out there with their camera phones, is that it's hard to deny what you see there. So I'll be honest here, take my reporter hat off for a second. What I saw there as just a person watching this footage was literally officers who were bringing their spray gas as people were just standing there. I literally just saw that. Toward the end of the clip, you see people standing there and you see a police officer in the corner of the video spraying them. They weren't attacking the officers. They weren't coming for anything. Didn't look like they were destroying any properties at all. Didn't see any of that. And yet what you have is clear evidence of the exact opposite of what the statement that came out of the police accountability office was. So that's what we have here, guys. We have, it looks like it's twofold. And to be honest, the people of this city, we talk about the Emerald City a lot, the people of this city are demanding the truth. You know, we want to hear real things coming from offices of accountability, any office that has authority. When you're talking about a statement that comes from the police force, of course, we're wanting some transparency here. We're really wanting truth. And one of the things about live streaming is that it provides just that. A clear line of truth. You also saw there in that clip Omari standing there with his camera phone, literally doing nothing wrong, and they threw a flashbang right at him. So again, he's declaring himself as media. He has on his media badge. You know, he's out there as media. A lot of these guys know him as media, and yet there still is no clear delineation between those who are out there capturing what's going on and those who are out there causing what's going on. And so unfortunately, what we see in the live footage, and what I will just say what I saw right there, is the opposite. And I think that you know, we talk about the wafflers, you know, with the budget, but it's kind of the same here. I think a lot of citizens are so used to, you know, misinformation, lies, honestly, that come out of these offices. And this is what we're talking about here. You know, right here on this platform, we have uplifted the need for transparency time and time again. I think when we talk about the differences between old normal tactics and new normal tactics, you guys will hear this language often, because right now we are definitely in a shift in this country. You know, a lot of people are waking up to the fact that those old tactics of, you know, let's do things in silos and then report out to the rest of the people. Let's figure out how to do this amongst ourselves. And then maybe we'll bring in community. Maybe we can ask a couple of leaders. Maybe we can go to the preachers. Maybe we can go to this organization. But that doesn't work anymore. People are calling and asking and demanding for accountability here. And one of the things that we see time and time again, and this is really the most unfortunate part, is that when you hear a statement like that, that comes from an office of accountability, like police, the mayor, when you hear this and you see certain things, unfortunately, it leaves us with this sense of dread, because we're like, once again, they just did the same old normal stuff. You know, they said what they thought the public wanted to hear. They said what would have been better to be, you know, it's better for their PR, honestly, to say, no, of course we didn't use any brute force on anyone who was peaceful. But we see right there that that isn't the case. And honestly, this cruise experience over this weekend, just this past Saturday, actually is a testament to the opposite. Right here, we have producers and crew members from ConvergeMedia that were out there on the day, and they literally got sprayed. John here with blue. I just saw the photos myself, and none of them were agitators. None of them were destroyers of property. None of them were coming out with bats and explosives, you know. connection to the King 5 article, or the King 5 report, there was also an article in the Seattle Times. And in that article, they literally expressed that they were only using these things for agitators, for those who were destroyers. But I saw the photos of crew right here that were sprayed with blue spray. And the blue spray was supposed to indicate that that was someone that they could go back to try to prosecute for something criminal. And here we are, our own crew members experiencing that. So again, the experiences of so many people that have been out there, so many live streamers, so many journalists really on the ground, giving their live stream, putting it out there for the world to see. So much of that happening, it's really hard for people to resonate with a statement like that comes from the police office, from the police or the chief or the mayor, right? At the end of the day, we cannot have this anymore. We're really demanding new normal stuff. And I think that we're going to continue to see protests every day, as TK and her team over there doing protests every day have said. The only way that we're going to see change is if we continue to press for it. So there it was right there. You guys be the judge. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
There's a lot going on. Are you ready? Ready to feel better, look better, be better? Drink water. Be ready for a pickup game. Insta-frame to work hard towards your aim? Drink water. Hydrate. Hydrate to invest in yourself. Cut down on sugar. Invest in your health. Imagine the possibilities and reach your potential. Who knows what's next? Be ready. Be hydrated.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Morning Update Show. I'm your host, Trey Holiday. And you guys, we're going to get into the next clip that we have here. Our guy, Big O, was able to get an interview with Dow Constantine. So we are going to be playing that for you. And here, Dow talks about the youth jail and other things surrounding that. So let's get right into it right here. I'm actually excited to hear this interview because I know a lot of people have been wanting to hear from Dow Constantine. So I'm glad Omari was able to check in with him. You guys watch this interview and I'll be right back.
All right, so we got him right here, King County Executive Dow Constantine. We've been trying to catch up with him for a minute, busy schedules. Finally landed the interview, and I appreciate you joining us right here on the Morning Update Show. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Can you tell people here in King County, what is the current state of COVID? I mean, there's lots of messaging going back and forth. What are the most important things that people should know about where we're at with COVID and what people should be doing?
Well, as you might recall, we were the first place in the nation to have an outbreak of coronavirus, and we jumped on it. We asked people to stay at home, to wash their hands, to do all the things, and they did. And that allowed us to escape the kind of situation we saw in New York, and now we're seeing in Texas, Florida, and other places. But people, have been letting down the guard a little bit, and it's been creeping back. We were down to 10, 20, 30 cases a day. Now we're at 150, 200 or more per day. And we're trying to keep a lid on that. And it is a tremendous challenge because we also want people to be able to earn a living, to do the things they need to do to keep their lives moving. We are concerned that people have to really be reminded to protect themselves, to protect their loved ones, to protect the entire community by avoiding unnecessary contacts, by wearing a mask, washing your hands, never going out when you're sick. And it is a particular challenge because there's a lot of disproportionality, I guess, as you might expect, in who's being infected. And that is something that I really want to convey today. African Americans or Black residents of our county are about 6.5%, but 12% of the infections. And it's even worse in the Hispanic Latino community, where it's about 10% of the population, but more than 27% of the new infections. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the bottom line is we need credible messengers to really be communicating with everyone about how to prevent infection, about how serious this is, both for young people who can suffer some significant and potentially lifelong consequences, but particularly for those who are older or have compromised immune systems. And we need to improve access to testing. And this has just been an absolute debacle on the part of the federal government. The failure to provide adequate testing, the mistakes right out of the gate, and still now 5 months later, inadequate resources, inadequate supplies for testing to happen wherever it needs to happen in the community. It is an abysmal failure by our national government, and it is something that we just cannot allow to ever be repeated.
I talked to the health department yesterday, and they were talking about the South King County is a hot spot. And I mean, there might be a few different reasons why, but I think one of the reasons that we discussed is that, a lot of the people who are essential workers, people who are going to work every day, are living south of the Seattle city limits. What kind of, are you guys, is the county taking any other special precautions or special efforts to address the issues there in South King County?
So we've been working very hard to push more messaging, more PPE, that is the protective equipment, more testing and testing capacity into South King County and South Seattle, where we're seeing an increase in infections. And you're absolutely right. I mean, part of the reason that there is a disproportionality in infection is because essential workers, the people who have to go out there and provide the services and make the community run, and people who need to get out there and earn a living to keep a roof over their heads, are disproportionately Black and Latino. And so they're going to be more likely to be exposed to infection. Also, Black and Latino households on average are bigger. They're multi-generational households. And the infections between kids and adults, or adults and seniors, is more likely under those circumstances. A lot of household infections are happening. And then people with underlying health conditions are more vulnerable. And because of social determinants of health, there are certain chronic health conditions that are more prevalent in the African American community and can make people more susceptible to more dire consequences from infection.
Right. So moving along, it's protest season. We're going we're closing in on month number 2. Just some of your thoughts on what's occurring here in Seattle, across King County, but specifically right here in the city. We hear a lot from the mayor, of course, and police chief and different city council members. But you have a wider view. Of course, you have the view of the county, and maybe you can share with us some of your thoughts as to what you're seeing out here in the streets in Seattle, and what role the county might play in that.
Well, in many ways, it's a tremendously exciting moment. I mean, I'm old enough to be able to remember in the late 1960s when people took to the streets demanding change. And that change didn't really ever come. And I don't want that to happen again. I mean, I was not an adult then, but I do think that the shared beliefs in the country are different now, that people are responding differently to this movement, and that there's an opportunity to use this moment to catalyze genuine change if we don't allow the window to close. Right? We gotta act. So the protests, the voicing of the deep grief and concern about the role of racism in the history of this nation and in its present institutions is something that can be a springboard for us to accomplish change that is needed to happen forever. And so that is a good thing, and we should all make sure that the message doesn't get hijacked by a few people who have their own agendas, many of whom are white and have ideologies that are not necessarily aligned with the Black Lives Matter movement. I am excited because I went into politics to try to create change, and now suddenly things have been shaken up by COVID, by economic collapse, by this awakening among more than African Americans, among people across this country and across this community who are saying, oh, damn, there is a chance here to really make change. And I had managed to somehow, the public had managed to somehow kind of assume that the world was just going to automatically and gradually get better, which it clearly is not. So I'm optimistic. I think that we have to capitalize on this moment, and there's some things that we're able to do. We'll talk about detention, I think, and other things in a minute, but on policing and community safety, we're beginning the process of diving into really a community-based model, particularly in urban unincorporated King County. And I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I've been working with Councilmember Zahalai, who's going out and doing some public hearings. I've talked with the sheriff very seriously about the need to be able to be open to change and engage that conversation fully. And I think it can happen. The same thing with transit police. Transit police are King County sheriffs, and that's true on both Metro and Sound Transit. And both for fare enforcement, which is privately contracted, and the police, which is contracted from a public agency, I think there's an opportunity to really dramatically transform that system along the same lines. And finally, we declared, we're the public health agency, declared that racism is a public health crisis. And we're gathering community members to help us really develop what the action agenda should be around that, not a mere declaration, but a set of actions that can respond to it in a way that comes from a public health perspective, is based on data, that is based on seeking better outcomes. And that has been an effective tool for us in approaching some other challenges, including gun violence and reducing the prevalence of youth detention.
What were your thoughts of Saturday's actions here? We're up here on Capitol Hill in regards to maybe that small majority that you're talking about, and then also the police, the Seattle police response. And then later on that night, the King County Sheriff reinforced the police as well as the Washington State Patrol. So as a macro view, as the county executive, if you can kind of give us your overall thoughts from Saturday.
Yeah, well, I think, in general, and I know it's become just a cliche now, but almost everybody protested peacefully and in a way that was heartfelt and productive. And some people decided to commit acts of violence. People breaking into small businesses and causing harm that is not on message. I did see that the King County Sheriff provided mutual support when it was requested. That was, we had asked that afternoon whether they were going to be backing up Seattle Police and told no. So I have yet to get an answer as to what changed, like what condition. I don't know if it was the Seattle Police declaring a riot or what the thing is. As you probably are aware, under the current system anyway, I don't run the sheriff's office. So they're a separate agency with a separate elected official in charge of them. But we have supported a charter amendment that the King County Council has placed on the ballot to make the sheriff an appointed position, so that then there would be accountability and more opportunity to control the policies of the sheriff's office. I do think that the protests in the streets need to continue. I want people to be safe, harking back to our conversation about COVID. I've been out to protests, I know many others have, and it needs to be a conversation in this moment that is led by Black voices and not, you know, as well-meaning as white allies are, not hijacked entirely by white people. Right.
And well, I'll wait this to the last segment, to our last question, which is about the youth jail. But of course, the youth jail was caught on fire on Saturday. Next question is Charlene Lyles, and this was an interesting turn of events that occurred right here on Converge, in that we had the Seattle Police Officers Guild, Mike Solon, and a few other officers on. And the conversation, it wasn't about any specific case, because a lot of times, you know, you go on TV, police can't talk about cases, and so you just kind of waste your time asking the question. And we knew that we couldn't talk about specific cases that were open and things like that. And so broader discussion about mental health, and about maybe that's a place where the Seattle Police Department and the community might see kind of eye to eye. And that the SPD said 17,000 calls last year were mental health. And, you know, they're like, hey, we're not necessarily suited for it. And the community is like, hey, why are the police responding to mental health? But during that conversation, Solon had brought what he said is that Charlene Lyles was suicide by cop. And so, of course, you know, at that point, we needed to bring Charlena's, you know, family on. And so we brought on Katrina, her cousin. And what Katrina said was that there is no final determination in this case or a lot of other cases, because the inquest process has been stopped. And, you know, when I asked her, I said, okay, well, man, who's in charge of the inquest process? Let's go talk to them. And she said that it was you. And, you know, right away, I was like, hey, Executive Constantine, what's the story? And that's kind of how we've ended up right here on this interview. Although we talked about a bunch of other topics, our interview today really started out of that conversation about Charlene Lyles. And so maybe you can tell us what is going on with the inquest process, maybe how it works briefly, and what's going on with it, and when will these inquests move forward so people can get a final determination as to the police shootings.
So the inquest is the medical examiner's inquest. So it's essentially the coroner's report. And fundamentally, it is designed to just ask who, what, when, where, and what we want to find out is why. And previously it was conducted by the district court, even though they were doing it just voluntarily. It's not part of their duties. And the case was presented by the county prosecutor. Families came to us. There was an upsurge in police-involved deaths a couple of years ago, and families came to us and said they didn't have faith in the outcome of these proceedings. And I guess if I can just distill down the real problem that was happening is, like, the officer that was involved was always being asked, did you fear for your life? And the answer, of course, was always yes. And then the press would take that and report, well, it's justified because the officer feared for his or her life. But that's not actually the standard. right? And especially now with the adoption of the new law, is supposed to be what a reasonable officer based on training would do. And what we wanted the question to be is not, did you subjectively fear for your life, possibly because of the deep-seated biases that we all carry around with us, and I mean we all carry around with us, but was your action consistent with your training? Did this happen because your training was wrong, because the policies were wrong, or because what you did departed from what you were trained to do? And in either case, how can we get the agency then to fix that so the tragedy doesn't repeat itself as it has over and over and over again? And we went through with families and some representatives of police and created an entirely new process. A new process that involved not the prosecutor, but outside counsel and staff bringing the facts in. A process that involved hiring not the district court, but other presiding officers. A process that the families involved could have much more faith in because they helped create it, and that wouldn't lead to that misleading conclusion at the end about whether you feared for your life. And we were immediately, and I signed this into law as an executive order, sued by the city of Auburn and Federal Way and Kent and Seattle and the King County Sheriff's Office. Like I said, I'm not the boss of them. And all of them to say that we were outside of our authority, that we shouldn't be asking these questions. We are fighting that in court right now. We should have an answer within 20 days. Some of the families have also raised the issue of whether the jury in the case should be able to have a finding of some criminal liability or that a criminal act occurred. And that has historically, by case law, not been allowed in the state of Washington, but the court is being asked to review that. And so several of the families, some of whom are represented by our own public defense department, are asking for that. And that should all be available to us within a few weeks. And then I hope that people will not take this on appeal, but they'll allow us to proceed with the many inquests that need to happen so families can get some answers.
This inquest issue here, because my understanding is that, until the inquest is done, there is no final determination as to what happened there. And, I mean, for families and for police, it's just left open-ended.
Yeah. And it's, obviously terrible for the families to have to relive what happened to their loved one. We made it so that because the police officer always has the right to refuse to testify constitutionally, right, in case they're concerned about criminal liability. But we made it clear that their boss does have to show up. And of course, the bosses didn't like that either. So the police chief or the sheriff or whoever has to come and say, what was the training? Did this person follow the training? What were the facts that night, et cetera, et cetera? Because we need the agencies to start changing the way in which they approach this, to start training people to react differently, to start changing their policies about when deadly force is going to be used, or we're never going to see a change in the outcomes that are happening in the community.
All right. Last topic here is the youth jail and perhaps maybe the King County jail as well. Can you explain, because I think the average person, or at least a lot of people on the street, when they hear no new jail or people out of jail, it kind of sounds like you're letting just people out of jail. Is there another side of that to where you're trying to build up capacity on one end so people don't end up going to jail, or is it like you're trying to close jails and let people out of jails?
Yeah, I mean, we've been steadily reducing detention at both the adult and youth levels over the course of the last couple of decades. And juvenile detention, just since I took office, we've been able to reduce from about 84 youth per day detained to about 20 this week. Just since mid-March, with the cooperation of the courts, the prosecutor, the defender, and others, have been able to reduce from 43 to 19, 20, 21, the number of youth detained. It is an ongoing challenge because it starts with prevention and making sure that young people are getting the investments to be able to avoid the trap of getting involved in the criminal legal system. And that goes to the work we're doing through Best Starts for Kids, the work we're doing with community-based organizations, dozens of them, that are helping young people get off to a better start in life. But it also involves making sure we have ample capacity for diverting people, whether it's adults or youth, out of the system rather than having them go through the criminal legal system, providing alternatives if they're awaiting trial so they don't have to be detained. A judge will allow them to be with an organization like Choose 180 or Community Passageways that can surround them with mentoring and monitoring and keep them safe and keep the community safe. And as we reduce the number of, let's just talk about youth for a second, youth in detention, we're able to convert that space to other uses. Right now, one of the pods is being used for FERS, which is for youth whose families have been involved in domestic violence, and they're able to come and stay there safely and get counseling for themselves and the entire family to work through the situation. And we're going to be continuing to move more and more pods outside of the secure detention and into community uses. We have the toughest job we have to do with reducing youth detention further is to identify the strategies, to work with community and fund the strategies to allow young people who are there because the courts have sent them there because they're pending trial on very serious charges, to be outside of secure detention. I think we can do it. I don't know who else has actually done it successfully, but the fact that we've gone from originally hundreds to 84 to 20 youth in detention gives me the confidence to essentially challenge the community, including the elected officials, to make it happen.
Right. And so two things there. It's like, one, so I mean, this building costs $200 million, and then it's, you know, it's not done yet, but before it's done, they're saying that, you know, we want to have it transformed, they repurpose it by 2025, and to be able to provide services.
Yeah. So remember, and this has been glossed over by lots of people, the building is an entire children and family center. It's got courts, it's got meeting rooms. Most of the work they do is around family issues, around foster placements. There's a criminal law element of it, but the detention portion is not the majority of the building. The thing that they burned down the trailers about the other day is a parking garage, right? So that's the part that's not done yet, but the building's done. Converting the detention portion has been part of the plan for many years now. I had them go back after it was approved in 2012 and redesign it so that the walls could be moved, the door could be moved, and space could be moved out of detention and into other uses, community uses, uses to help kids get back on track in life, as we were able to do exactly what we're doing, which is one by one reduce the number of kids the courts feel compelled to order us to detain.
Right. And you said there's a drop in the number of youth that are being detained at the jail. Is that because there's a decrease in crime, because the police just aren't arresting for people committing crimes, or these third-party programs and interventions that you talked about are working? I
mean, yes. I think the answer is yes. Over the long term, there has been a reduction in crime, even though like the detention center we just tore down had 212 beds. It was built in 1953 when the county was 1/3 the size it is now. There has been a gradual reduction in the number of crimes being committed by youth. And we, in addition to that, have been getting much more cooperation from all the independent players in the system to figure out how to send kids to alternatives that are less traumatic and more likely to help them get their lives back on track and to keep the community safe, because everyone wants that as well. And that has to be part of what we all take responsibility for. If a young person is acting out to try to figure out how we can help them come to terms with what they've done, and to reconnect with their community that will help carry them through into adulthood, when people tend to get their lives together and be able to move on to be responsible members of the community.
Right. And so, what are you saying to people who are, when you tweeted out, I guess it was last week, maybe the week before, like, hey, looking to close detention center by 2025, and a lot of people are like, close it now. So,
Right.
I mean, of course, I follow the protests. So, a lot of in the protests, it's like, why can't you close it now if that's the end goal? So for people who are on the side of the issue of they want this detention center, the detention part closed right away, why is it that there's a 5-year plan or 4
Again,
now?
I mean, first of all, I want to thank Black Lives Matter Seattle King County for demanding that it be closed, but also setting out the sort of commitment to help figure out how to deal with the genuine challenge that exists around kids who are committing serious and violent crimes against others. I'm not in charge of who gets to leave and who stays. That is very much the job of the judges. What I am doing is challenging them, saying that we are going to make the investments. Collectively, we're going to work to figure out how we can get to what I am declaring to be our community's commitment to not have centralized detention for young people. And there are going to have to be expectations put upon us, the defender, the prosecutor, the cops, and the courts to help make that happen along with the community. I want to just briefly, before our time's up, talk about adult detention, because we've been able to reduce gradually the number of adults detained. We have 2 major jails, one in downtown Seattle, one in Kent. The number was about 1,900 adults before COVID. We set about to reduce the occupancy to get people distanced so we could, as we have, prevent an outbreak of coronavirus in the jails. With the cooperation of all those players I mentioned, we were able to go from 1,900 to 1,300 adults in detention very quickly. So the challenge I've set out now is to stay at that number or below, and that when this crisis is over, the coronavirus crisis, to begin closing the downtown Seattle jail in phases and wheeling into a different way of approaching the challenge of the criminal legal system. I think we can do it. That building's going to have to close anyway. It was built in 1986. It is not a good design. It is not a good place. And all these players in the system who are saying, I never told them, actually know that. They know that we've been talking about how can we close down this building. So now it's time for them and the entire community to engage in conversation about how we do it safely.
I know we're up against the time, Executive Constantine, but if you had a minute or two to maybe share what your vision is, then, I mean, you said that, closing the jail and approaching a different way of dealing with criminal activity. Maybe you can share with us what that vision is.
Yeah, well, first off, there are models around the world where countries, communities have figured out how to engage in a different way with people who violated community norms or broken the law or even committed violence against others. And we need to look to those and figure out how we can reduce the use of this sort of one-size-fits-all instrument of the cops, the prosecutor, the courts to deal with a range of challenges. We talked about the way in which police are not always the answer when you're getting a call to someone who's having a behavioral health crisis, right? And the bad outcomes that leads to. Well, that is true of the entirety of the system. We have to find a way for the courts not to have to be the solution to everything, not to have to solve every single problem. Now, the answer is very similar to the one with youth. It is early investments to make sure people have opportunity, and if they have challenges in life, that we can help them get past those challenges. It is diversion into alternatives that help people get back on track. Yes, to be accountable for what they've done, but also to find a way to move forward with their life rather than just going to the jail, having a traumatic experience, getting sent back out with no resources, and getting back into the same old cycle. And I believe that everyone deep down understands that this is the right way to go, but you know, people are sort of inherently resistant to change. That is how people are hardwired. So that's why, going back to our earlier conversation, a moment like this where we have multiple crises and awakenings converging is a really kind of a once in a lifetime chance to make this change. And we got to unite to be able to drive it forward. I think that this community has the resources to do it. So, you know, whatever our differences or disagreements have been, we can carry those with us, but we got to figure out how to move this thing forward now.
All right, King County Executive Dow Constantine, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us, and I hope we'll get an opportunity to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Amari.
Well, there you have it. That was Omari and Dow Constantine, King County Executive. You know, so he was able to lay out his plan for what the youth jail could be, what that space could be. I think there's a lot of chatter in the community about understanding, well, what was the need for it anyway, right? I think there was a whole campaign, clearly, from so many folks, the People's Party, you know, no new youth jail, so many people, there were shirts printed and people were out there in the streets declaring no new youth jail. And so this is just a testament that sometimes the people are right. We knew that there was another way to deal with youth in terms of criminal activity. And there's a lot of studies that really showcase this community policing and self-policing inside of communities that works. I've said it before, you guys will hear me say it again. I'm really talking about the measures where, hey, I know this block. I know these people that live on this block. Y'all can get with me. I got a crew. We're all trained. We understand mediation. We understand de-escalation. We understand restorative justice. We understand different ways of getting to the root of a problem. It doesn't have to require the police, guns, that it doesn't have to require that kind of authority. And so I think that just to hear, you know, King County Executive Dow Constantine speak to that right now and speak to the fact that there are other measures that could be taken and that there's community pathways that now can be explored. That's the exciting piece. I also want to, you know, in that clip, he did say, you know, thank you to Black Lives Matter, Seattle, King County for asking and demanding for, you know, the jail to be closed. I just want to encourage the representatives of Black Lives Matter, Seattle, King County, to come on to Converge's show and share your perspective. What had you do that demand? I think it was a demand from a lot of folks in the community. And so, you know, we would love to hear from Black Lives Matter, Seattle, King County. They can, you know, again, Converge is always a platform for both sides of the story. And so we would love to hear from them and also hear, you know, their pathways and what their vision is for all of this kind of protest, this movement. Clearly, Black Lives Matter is you know, really at the forefront here. It is for the nation. If you look at any major media, they're chanting and talking about Black Lives Matter as an organization. And so we would love to be able to know who they are here in King County and what their vision is for community. So it looks like, Omari, you guys, just before we get out of here, almost getting close to time, but our guy, you know, always working there on the fly. And it looks like he was able to catch up with okay, it is they just told me this, it's Seattle City Council Insight. That's what SCC stands for, Seattle City Council Insight. He was able to give a little bit more background into the ACLU case that actually utilized footage from Converge. Again, you know, as Omari said the first time we reported about this, you know, they didn't originally reach out to Converge about utilizing that footage in a federal court case. They are, however, you know, they said, look, the right way would have been for us to reach out, so they did apologize for that. But we're glad, again, that media like this, independent media right here on the ground, the citizen journalist who has been out there live streaming and getting the footage of what's going on in the streets, again, unedited, no issues, straight up what you saw out there and on those streams is what was going on out there. And so shout out to all of you guys, because without you, a lot of these things would not be visual. You know, we wouldn't know what's going on. All we would have is the report backs. So here we are, Omari catching up with Seattle City Council insight, so we can get a little bit more insight.
All right, so SPD went to court today at 5 p.m. They had to put a filing in against the ACLU filing that went in earlier this week to find them in contempt. As usual, we have Kevin Schofield here for the analysis and the breakdown. Kevin from SCC Insight, that's Seattle City Council Insight. One, Kevin, what did the SPD say in response to the ACLU filing?
Yeah, so they had two things to respond to. The ACLU said, we want the judge to find you in contempt. And they said, we want a whole set of additional restrictions on what you can do with crowd control weapons. So they said three things. They said, first of all, hey, contempt is really serious. That's the thing that people go to jail for. So if it happens in the courtroom and the judge witnesses it, the judge can say, yep, you're in contempt, and send you to jail right away. If it happens outside of the courtroom, then it's basically a trial, and the city has the right to defend themselves. They have the right to evidence. They have the right to maybe even a jury trial. And they said, you know, we're not giving up those rights, right? So, you know, we think that there's more to that, and we have to take this seriously. And then they said, you know, along those lines, the ACLU is really telling you just half the story, right? You know, they rebutted a couple of the things that the ACLU had said in their complaint about, the ACLU listed, you know, about 20 different incidents of things that happened with individuals. And they picked out a couple and said, see, you know, this isn't the whole story. And we've got about 1,300, almost 1,400 videos from officers' body-worn cameras that we've got to sort through here. We haven't got all officers' incident reports in yet. So we need 60 days to pull that all together in order to like really tell you the story of what happened there. We're not really prepared to do that yet, particularly if we have to defend ourselves against an accusation of contempt of court. And then the third thing they said about the restrictions that the ACLU was asking for was, they said, look, you're asking for so much more stuff. You're basically asking for a new temporary restraining order, right? And, you know, but in your, you know, in the thing that they filed earlier this week, they didn't do any of the stuff that they need to do legally to get a new temporary restraining order. So, and by the way, all the things they're asking for would conflict with the consent decree, just as Judge Robart ruled last week that the city council's ban on crowd control weapons conflicts with the consent decree. So we've got all sorts of problems there that need to get it worked out as well. That's what they basically said today.
Just a quick question. I don't know if it would be in this filing or not, but we talked about this earlier. Now they said the SPD is saying, hey, we need 60 days to be able to sort through the body cams and everything else. We talked earlier about when a blast ball is used, there's supposed to be a report to each blast ball. What's the process with that as far as a report for every one of the blast balls that were used?
Yeah, so police officers have to do what's called the use of force report. I actually spent a little time looking up the policies around this today. So they have to do use of force reports around them. And, you know, if they throw, you know, two in quick succession, that may end up being like a single use of force report, but they still have to report like, I threw two, right? They have to account for, there's accounting they have to do for, and the police department has to account for every single blast ball that they issue to an officer and how many they get back and what happens with those blast balls, right? So there's a whole bunch of paperwork.
From all these court filings, then what the public might want to be interested in is the actual reports around the blast balls, because that was one of the big things that was there, was the blast balls and the different types of mace that was used. So regardless to these parliamentary procedures that are there, it might be interesting to keep an eye out as far as the reporting for each blast ball.
Yeah, and all those use of force reports and all those reports, that's all public records. We can as citizens, we can ask for all of them.
All right, and one last thing is, okay, what's next? So ACLU filed earlier this week. Now the city of Seattle, the Seattle Police Department has responded. What's the next step?
Next step is the judge has scheduled a hearing for 9 a.m. Friday morning. when both sides get to actually speak to him, and more importantly, he gets to ask some questions. And I'm not terribly familiar with this judge. I've read some of his stuff, and I've got a guess as to some of the things he's going to ask. He's going to say, okay, assume the city is right about some of the points they're making here. Maybe I'm not going to rule on the contempt thing. Maybe I'll give you your 60 days to kind of work that out and come back so that you can really defend yourself against that, because you have the right to defend yourself against that. But then as far as the restrictions, so what are my boundaries, right? If doing everything that the ACLU is asking for would conflict with the consent decree, how much can I do? Tell me, are you going to make the city answer that question?
At that point and say, hey, and find that order invalid against Robart's order because it goes against the consent decree.
And behind the scenes, Judge Jones and Judge Robart are talking, right? Judge Robart said that last week. And they're going to be talking more this week about that. So whatever Judge Jones comes up with, it's going to be consistent with what Judge Robart has done.
Last question here. Can we expect Judge Jones to rule from the bench on Friday, or is he going to hear the arguments and then get back to everybody?
That's a good question. My guess is he's probably going to think hard about it. And after he talks to them, he's going to want to talk to Judge Robart again. So if I were a betting man, I probably would not bet that he's going to rule in the morning, but maybe by the end of the day.
All right. Kevin Schofield, SEC Insight. Thank you so much as usual.
Thanks for having me back. Always love talking to you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
And there we have it, our guy Big O getting a little bit more insight from SEC Insight, our guy Kevin Schofield. Thank you so much, because again, without these interviews, without us digging a little bit deeper, honestly, a lot of folks wouldn't understand and know how these offices are ran. So we really appreciate being able to catch up with folks, and really give you guys a full, well-rounded picture of what is going on right here in the Emerald City. And you guys know that brings our show today to a close. Thank you so much to all of our supporters, anybody who's watching. We so appreciate you guys watching and supporting our efforts here. If you guys are liking what you're seeing, please tag a friend, share what you guys are seeing, share our show. We would definitely appreciate it, and we already appreciate all the love that we are receiving by being balanced and trying to tell these stories the way that they are. So thank you again for watching the Morning Update Show. You guys know I got to stand up even without my guy Big O. We got to do it right and make sure that you guys, again, stay hydrated out there and stay refreshed. Looking forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. This has been the Morning Update Show. I'm out. Peace.
Lift every voice and sing till earth in heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on to victory.